All right, joining us now, former National Security Advisor during the Biden administration, Jake Sullivan. Okay, you heard what the special envoy had to say. We now know that President Zelensky's headed to the White House with a number of European allies. That's going to be a different tone than that February meeting we watched play out in the Oval Office. What does it mean to have this be a much bigger coalition for this conversation?
Well, first, Shannon, when it comes to the summit that just unfolded over the course of Friday in Alaska, to me, it really comes down to a simple question. What did each leader go in seeking to achieve, and what did they get out of it? President Trump went in seeking an immediate ceasefire, and in the absence of an immediate ceasefire, he would impose severe consequences. That's the clip you just played. President Putin went in to avoid an immediate ceasefire and to avoid any immediate consequences. And I think based on that, President Putin came out having achieved what he set out to achieve, and President Trump didn't achieve what he set out to achieve. Now, Steve Witkoff has just said there was a number of things discussed in the meeting, and I do hope that when President Trump sits down with President Zelensky on Monday, they will talk about those security guarantees, but also talk about what it's going to take to pressure Putin, to actually squeeze Putin to make sure that he delivers at the end of the day. Because right now it looks like he gets to keep on killing Ukrainians, keep on aggressing without any consequences. And if that remains the case in the coming days and weeks, then this diplomacy will not have succeeded.
So how does the dynamic change, having these European leaders in the room with Zelensky, sort of having his back as he goes into this conversation with President Trump face to face after that's super awkward? You've spent time in the Oval Office. I don't know that I've seen one more awkward than that meeting in February.
Yeah, it was very difficult to watch. President Trump basically blame the president of a sovereign democratic country, a partner of the United States, for being attacked by Russia. That was tough to watch. I think having some European allies in the room alongside President Zelensky will create a better atmosphere to talk about something vital, which is how do we make sure that we give Ukraine the security commitments, the security guarantees it needs to ensure that Russia can never attack again after this war ends. Steve Witkoff just said something very interesting. He said that on the table is the potential for an Article 5 commitment from the United States. If that's in fact the case, that would be quite striking. So I think we will all see what comes out of that meeting on Monday. But critically, handing away more Ukrainian territory than Russia has been able to take militarily, giving it to Russia diplomatically, I think this would, as President Zelensky has said, just set Russia up to attack Ukraine in the future. And we definitely should not take Russia's word for it when they say, oh, we won't do this again, even if they put it in legislation in Russia. Remember, before this war started, they said they were never going to start the war. We called them out on that. And of course, they've been proven time and time again to lie directly, clearly through their teeth, and they may do so again. So we cannot take their word for any commitment that they may make about future aggression against Ukraine.
So critics of where we are now point to your administration and say that you're responsible, the Biden administration, and previously the Obama administration with Crimea, for where we've arrived today. Here's what President Putin said Friday night.
Today, when President Trump saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good, businesslike and trustworthy contact.
So no doubt he was spending that time flattering President Trump as they were standing there together. But the point is, there were invasions by Putin into Ukraine under the Obama administration, under the Biden administration, not under Trump administration number one.
Well, first, the war continued under the first Trump administration, the war that began in the Obama administration. But then there was this full-scale invasion. What I found striking about that comment is it's pretty transparent, Shannon. This is a former KGB guy trying to figure out how to flatter his negotiating counterpart to create a better circumstance for the outcome he wanted. And remember the outcome Putin wanted from this summit. He wanted to be able to walk away without a ceasefire in place, to be able to continue to bomb Ukraine and not to suffer further consequences from it. I think the best thing for the U.S. to do right now would be to ratchet up the pressure. President Trump talks about the art of the deal. deals require leverage. Leverage requires pressure. And that means that what President Trump should actually do is something he has shown he's been unwilling to do so far, which is squeeze Putin hard so that he actually comes to the table in a serious way to end this war. Well, we haven't seen that yet, and I have my doubts that without further pressure, we're going to see it.
So there were pretty tough sanctions in place. Numerous administrations have done that, but there were new ones that were levied during Trump #1. Some of those got lifted during President Biden's term in 2021. Here is Senator Ted Cruz speaking to that point.
And the reason we have a war in Ukraine is because of Joe Biden and the Democrats' weakness. In particular, Joe Biden waived the sanctions on Nord Stream 2, the undersea pipeline from Russia to Germany. When Joe Biden came in, he gave a multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin, and that caused the war in Ukraine.
So what about the point of those sanctions being waived in May 2021?
Well, Shannon, as you know, not a single drop of gas moved through that pipeline from Russia to Germany. That pipeline never came online. It never happened, and it won't happen now going forward, as President Biden said. So to somehow draw a causal link from Nord Stream 2 to this war, I think just doesn't hold water based on the history of it. And then what President Biden did was rally the world to impose the toughest sanctions on Russia, including right up to his final days in office. And he handed off to President Trump, I think, a very strong hand in terms of being able to further tighten those sanctions, a blueprint for additional sanctions on Russia's oil sector. And I believe that that is what we should see now. President Trump should walk away from the summit in Alaska, sit with his European counterparts, with President Zelenskyy, and say, now's the moment. Russia's economy is vulnerable. We can actually tighten the screws on them and produce the peace that everybody would like to see. But a real peace, a just peace, not a peace that is imposed on Ukraine by Russia and the United States.
Jake, before you go, I want to ask you, a number of your colleagues have been called over from the Biden administration to various investigations on the Hill, talking about whether he was truly the commander-in-chief, how he was functioning in his final months in office and years. Have you been approached, and would you testify?
Well, I've spoken to these issues publicly, and I'd be happy to speak to them privately as well. I'll say the same thing, which I always say, because it's the truth. And that is, I watched President Biden in the Oval Office in the Situation Room. I watched him well and faithfully discharge his duties as the commander-in-chief. And I think he passed on a strong hand to his successor in terms of the economy, in terms of our competition with China, in terms of our alliances. And when he handed things off, the United States was not at war. So I was very proud to work for President Biden.
Well, we'll wait to see if your name ends up on the list. We'll track it all here in Washington. Jake Sullivan, thank you.
Thank you.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy reiterated on Sunday that Kyiv will not surrender any territory to Moscow, pushing back against mounting international speculation about potential land for peace negotiations. The Constitution of Ukraine makes it impossible to give up territory or trade land, Zelenskyy said during a press conference at the European Commission on Sunday. He added that Russia has repeatedly tried and failed to seize the entirety of the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine for a period of 12 years. The Donbas, which includes Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, is an industrial hub, with coal mining and steel production central to Ukraine's economy. Since the territorial issue is so important, it should be discussed only by the leaders of Ukraine and Russia at the trilateral talks with Ukraine, United States, Russia, Zelenskyy said. The Ukrainian leader, who spoke alongside EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, said that so far the Kremlin has given no sign that the trilateral will happen. With regards to any territorial questions in Ukraine, our position is clear. International borders cannot be changed by force. These are decisions to be made by Ukraine and Ukraine alone, and these decisions cannot be taken without Ukraine at the table, von der Leyen said. Their remarks came after Russian President Vladimir Putin's meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump in Alaska on Friday, during which the Russian leader outlined conditions for ending the war, including demands for control over parts of eastern Ukraine. Following the meeting with the Russian leader, Trump signaled that Zelenskyy should take Putin's deal to end the war because Russia is a very big power and Ukraine is not. Still, as Secretary of State Marco Rubio dismissed claims that Trump would pressure Zelenskyy to give up large swaths of its sovereign land to Russia. The president has said that in terms of territories, these are things that Zelenskyy is going to have to decide on, Rubio told Maria Bartiromo on Fox News' Sunday Morning Futures. All the president is trying to do here is narrow down the open issues, Rubio said, adding that Trump is focused on ending the Kremlin's war in Ukraine. You can't have a peace deal between two warring factions unless both sides agree to give up something, and both sides agree that the other side gets something. Otherwise, if one side gets everything they want, that's not a peace deal. It's called surrender. And I don't think this is a war that's going to end anytime soon, on the basis of surrender, Rubio said. Zelensky said he hopes the upcoming meeting with European allies and Trump will be productive, contrasting it with the heated Oval Office exchange during his February visit.